could I have your attention and could I welcome you? We're very pleased to see such a full room. I'm welcoming you on behalf of CRIC. CRIC is a research project that has investigated the reconstruction of culture after conflict. And in that process, we have discovered that memorials are much more important than we had actually predicted and thought. And in particular, that they are very complex and very different in what they do. So for the Festival of Ideas, we thought it would be really interesting to get in touch with people in town and hear what they thought. So we have had our memorial boxes, those beautiful boxes here. They have been at different places in town. We know we have several hundreds of questionnaires. And we hope through this little workshop that we would be able to together look at this, to in some way invite people who are interested to come in and see how one might do this kind of research. There is at each table there's someone who have worked on memorials. We just divide this table, the boxes out. It's like Christmas, isn't it? Would you pass them down and tip them out and think a way of working together?
The problem is uniting national identity and memory. Memory is such a fractured thing, and that's from a 60-year-old woman who is German. And actually, she writes, if you could decide on the building of a new memorial, who or what would you like it to be for? And she said, to the European Union and European peace, and to all displaced persons, refugees, expellees.
I like the sentiment of the soldier looking over his shoulder towards the station.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever really noticed that.
She's not terribly old and not terribly young, but her views are quite wide. So she thinks a new memorial could be for soldiers who have died since 1990, and she's saying in Iran and Afghanistan. But she actually ends on saying my grandfather died at Verdun.
This one said, I am concerned that future generations will not even know what memorials are. For schools, history syllabuses are not joined up chronologically. So perhaps they're saying that for future generations it's more difficult for us to understand the impact of memorials.
I've had some interesting answers for question 4 about forgotten groups. I've got one for medical staff who died in conflict, as well as a lot for women who also died in conflict. It's interesting that for that answer I've either got a list of things or I'm not sure, don't know. So there's either a very strong opinion or there's none whatsoever.
I think we sometimes don't recognise the more ordinary people who still do good things. So real sense that, similar to you, the people who've perhaps been overlooked.
I think something quite interesting is that when they're talking about who they should have memorials for, people are starting to say like really modern figures. So there's one for Steve Jobs and people like that. So it's really different to kind of like the war and really things set in the past than there are now. You know what I mean? So it's more like...
Most of our questionnaires are teenagers, so we have replies from 16, 17 and 18.
Yeah.
Soon there'll be nobody left that remembers, that lived, that witnessed any of the First World War. So do you think those First World War memorials will change once there are no witnesses left?
I don't think so, actually, because I think, for many people, those First World War memorials and even Second World memorials are already something that's happened in the past, and we have to, and we for so many of us, these conflicts are so distant.
There was one comment I quite liked, which was about are there some groups who become forgotten in our memorials, and it says, yes, those who die on the other side of conflict, those who die equally tragically, sacrificially, but less publicly. And that seems to sort of capture some of the thoughts.
If you're very keen on celebrating something to create a sense of unity maybe within a country, and I think the French probably they have more memorials even in Paris than I think in the Netherlands. It's something like, wow, let's not waste the money on that. That's more the mentality.
Very practical.
Yeah, very practical. Yeah.
If we go quickly over through the tables, your sense of the age profile and gender and things like that. So Matthias, should we start over in your group? I have a sense they're very systematic around this corner.
A lot of people said that there were too few monuments and that Britons don't remember enough And another comment from people sort of generally on sort of viewing monuments today was how do you reach everybody in a sort of globalized, homogenized, McDonald's kind of centered world? A lot more commentary on sort of sadness, underlined, futility of conflict, stimulating reflection from people who actually witnessed the war and perhaps lost relatives themselves, and words like pain, catharsis, these kinds of words crop up.
We tried to concentrate on the ideas of forgetting, participation, and perceptions. With participation, in terms of whether they participate in anniversaries, there's a predominance of always or sometimes, which is 49, with never only being 10. A lot of the types of memorials that people seem to be thinking about were all war memorials, and their favorites were often the Station Road Memorial is mentioned.
This corner?
We have a good comment here. I think memorials should be something useful to the community and not big blocks of stone. She was 70 years old.
70 years old?
Yeah.
So, in terms of what we might have discovered, there seemed to be, in terms of favorite, there's a clear favorite, and that is shared between different age group, which I actually thought was interesting and not necessarily predictable or what one would automatically expect. Also, I get the sense from talking around and hearing, listen to you, that a lot of questionnaires have been filled in with hardly information, but there are a lot of questionnaires which have been filled in with a lot of thoughts and a lot of very sort of personal statements, reflection. I've thought in particular some of the reflection on who people think should also be remembered. And there I think it would be interesting to study in greater detail whether the missing groups are interpreted differently for young kids and older. Where I got the sense from also looking a bit at them that for the oldest people, the ones which are missing are still the ones from the war. When we get to the younger people, it expands out, it becomes more a sense of social justice as such, maybe, and one get a wider sense of ordinary people, and maybe also great abstractions about ideas or accomplishment, or that the old monuments could be used in new ways. We don't need that there's sort of not a recycling but a rethinking about monuments, and that I think would be really interesting to look at in greater detail.
It was interesting for me to find some comments how difficult it is nowadays to erect memorials in this divided and fractured society, and how difficult to decide what to remember and what is left out from remembrance, from public remembrance.
2 days ago on the 20th, ETA declared the end of their violence, and already the following day we have articles in all the Spanish newspapers talking about memorial maps and memory maps and memorials that are going to be built all over Spain for ETA's victims, and of course that's creating tensions as well. So it's a very contentious topic in Spain for lots of reasons.
It is really quite exciting to talk about issues like this with people who more or less randomly come together, rather than always with your own little group. So thank you very much. Through the memorials themselves, we get a version of history. This is what we remember. And through the anniversaries, they're being repeated, and you are sort of drawn in to remember it in that particular way. So they are emotional, psychological tools, and they're also things which are politically manipulated. So from our own research, we learned much about the political manipulation, but from a day like today of an open workshop, we learn very much about the emotional and the personal attachment that people have to the memorials they experience.